Hello, this is Matt from Skybow. If you are interested in how you can bring data from other lists into your SharePoint Forms, then this is the right video for you. Real quick, there's no agenda. It's just this one slide where I want to go through the possibilities of how you can look up data before we go into a real demo where I will show you all these possibilities. First of all, for sure, what everyone knows is the option with a standard lookup to connect lists, SharePoint lists and libraries within SharePoint. The main limitation there is that, you can only access data from the current site. So no cross-site or anything else outside. It's just lookups in the same list. You can connect them. And that's the basic possibility that everyone has also out of the box. Within our forms, we do have an enhanced lookup, and the enhanced lookup is there for, as you can see here on the right side, for example, to show additional columns. So if you have a lookup list somewhere else and normal lookup just has one column to show data from, and you could, of course, create a calculated columns where you have all these columns combined into one, like name, job title, email, etc. But that's not, that's always additional work. And with enhanced lookup, you can show additional columns in the drop down to choose the correct item. And there's one more thing that is important with the enhanced lookup, and that's this well-known limitation of 5,000 items in SharePoint. If you have a list where you look up data from, which has more than 5,000 items, then this can lead to issues. And that's very well handled with our lookup. So that's no issue there, because we load always chunks with 500 items, and it's real fast. I can show you afterwards. I have a very large list. I can show you how this will look like and how this will work. Because the out of the box or the standard lookup is quite slow as well, and our enhanced lookup is quite fast. Another thing that we have, and I think that's quite unique on the market, is something to look up data from any other site. And let's say you have one site collection where you have all your core data like employees, products, etc. Maybe cost centers, whatever, like a global site, and you want to look up data from this site. We have a specific lookup for that approach, for that case. That's something I will show you. A fourth option is to have sublists and libraries. It's also kind of a how to get data into the form. I have a scenario for that as well, not just showing that, but also how to retrieve data from them. Then something else, what we have in our expression language is we have 3 different query functions. And with our query functions, we can actually query other lists, data from other lists, one item, multiple items, etc. And we can use those queries actually everywhere where you can use expressions. So the Skybow expression language. That one I will show you as well. And last but not least, of course, we can always use our HTTP request action to get information from basically any open or any public web service, API, doesn't matter, Graph, Facebook, whatever. You can look up data from there as well. All right, those are the main options I want to go through today, since it's just a very short webinar. Let's jump into the demo. What I've prepared is go back here. I'm using our expense demo that's an expense request demo that I've done in previous sessions as well. And what I've added there is an additional list, the one here. And if we open up the new item, we see a couple of things here. So first of all, we have first scenario, and I have to tell you that this is not a real scenario. It's just some demo scenarios, so it's not a real use case if you're confused. So they are not really, some of them are connected, but it's just to show the different possibilities. So first of all, if you have the large lookup, that's the first one. I think the normal lookup, I don't have to show you, but the large lookup, and that's the one here. I do have, maybe first I can show you that one as well, a large list. This large list is actually a simple one, but we do have 38,000 items in that list. So just item 1, 2, 3, etc., and some status, a choice field. So we do have a couple of active and inactive ones. So only 39 inactive ones. All right, so quite a large list. And if we go back to our additional list, and if we would look at the out-of-the-box form, so the edit form is still out of the box, as you can see, that's the out-of-the-box one. And I do have this, or is it my large? Probably more up here, large lookup. And as you can see, it's quite slow. So even if you click inside, it takes some time to load. And yeah, if you scroll out or if you search for something like 1109, it's quite slow. So, and then again, you click, it takes more time, click. And that's how it would look like out of the box. If we now go back to the skybow form, we see that this large lookup is here, and we load it once you scroll down, as you see. So it's very fast. And if we do the same here, and it's also for multi-item, as you can see, you can select as many items as you like. And if you go there and say filter, it's just there. So it's real quick. Yeah, this is just, let's say, a normal lookup, but it's the enhanced version, which is, if you have a list with 5,000 more, it will anyway take the enhanced lookup, so you cannot take the out of the box anymore. All right, that's the large lookup. And the second thing I want to show you is the enhanced lookup, which is a couple of weeks ago, we've released that feature where you can configure the columns to show down here. So as you can see, here I have the number and the name, and I can select them. And the column that is visible here, that's out of the box, you choose a column to show here. And in that case, I have already a column which combines these two values to show up here. So probably not the best scenario for that one, but as you can see, we would have different columns. These are shown in a table, and you can also search for all of them. So and the clone, and there it is. And we can also use this add new button. So we can add an item to that list directly, which will bring up the new form of that list. 11 demo. That's the field I'm going to show. All right. And it's automatically selected. Now I have it down here. Good. Those are the two very basic ones. Yeah. So now if we have a look at the cross-site lookup, what I've prepared is I have a core data site collection. As you can see, it's a different site collection. I've added two lists. one for products, another one for employees. And we will take the employee list, like the global employee list, with some name, photo, email address, etc., and also the manager. Of course, some of you will have this information in the Active Directory, but it's just as a use case. Doesn't have to be exactly like that. But I have a couple of customers who really maintain a SharePoint list with all its employees because they have additional information which they will not have in the Active Directory. In my scenario, I'm using that manager field. It's just a people picker field in here. And I will link to that list. That's what I did here. So I have my employee list. And again, this time it makes more sense. I have these additional columns as well. This also works for the cross-site collection or the cross-site lookup. So we see all the information. And as soon as I choose one of the items here, and you see manager for John is myself, my manager is Sebastian, and what I'm doing in another field down here is I will read that information. If I choose John, it will read the information that manager of John is Matthias, and I will set that directly into another people picker on my form, so I can retrieve that information cross-site into my form. And maybe you realize down here, small, down here, I'm showing all the expenses, and that's why I'm doing it in that expense demo. Here I'm using a sub list. It's not a list which is filtered on that main item. The thing I'm doing here is I'm filtering that list on that manager. So all these requests, they have a manager, and I'm filtering that list based on that one here, so on that field. So if I would change here from John to Matthias, which will change to Sebastian, down here, this will change as well. So if I change to Matthias, we see Sebastian here, and now I can see all the expenses which are currently at Sebastian stable. So only like, how many do we have? Five requests are there. And that's already the fourth thing with the sub lists. So I just added a sub list from this site, and I'm not using it as this dossier sub list. Some of you probably know. So it's just a filter based on some other information on the form. I will show you afterwards in the configuration. Then next scenario is I have that list down here, which is filtered, and here on the right side, I've added some more columns. The first one here is just a sum. So open amount to approve. So here we have the expenses to approve. And if we look at the total column, yeah, most of them in that scenario is 0, but we have one which is 30. And I'm doing a sum based on all those here and get this into another field on my form. And why could that be useful? Because I could probably trigger something else based on that information. So based on the 30, or if I switch back to John, we will see now it's much more because I have other amounts here, 1,741 total amount to approve. So that will automatically be recalculated and summed up based on that sublist information. Last but not least, before we jump into the backend, how this is done, is another scenario where I'm using the query functions. So the scenario I was building here was all these requests, they have activities. So some activities happened, they were approved, they were sent back, etc. And what I wanted to show here is once you click on an item, once you select an item, I retrieve information from another list, which is the activity list, based on the selected item. I will retrieve the latest activity here. So if I go down, you see approved by Matthias, request submitted, etc., etc. So you will always change based on the selected item. So you can really connect all these things together. So here we look up data from another list, showing it as a list. Here we look up data from, again, another list using our query functions. Here we sum these things here. We filter this list based on this field, which is based on that one. So it's all connected with each other. All right, those are the scenarios. And now let's have a look into the backend. And I'm quite happy that I can show you today the new look and feel of our Solution Studio, which just was getting released last Friday. So brand new look. I hope you like it. Maybe you can, yeah, if you have feedback on that one, thanks. I hope you like it. I really like it. All right, so that's my additional list, the new form. And as you can see, the large lookup is really just a standard lookup. I changed from default to enhanced and nothing else. That's it. Which, like I said here, when source list exceeds the threshold limit, we anyway switch to enhanced. So you cannot. Even if you have default specified, it will in the front end, it will use the enhanced anyway. That's the one here. The enhanced lookup was with these additional columns. That's also a feature which was introduced a couple of weeks ago, that you have, if you switch from default to enhanced, you have these additional drop-down columns. So you can specify each column that you want to show in that drop-down list. That's the only thing I did here. Otherwise, it's just a standard lookup. And then the employee, that's basically this cross-site lookup. And the cross-site lookup, you can add directly from within the form. If you scroll down, you see that data lookup. So on the data connectors, you have that data lookup. And it's like a normal lookup. You give it a name, an internal name. And then for now, it's only SharePoint list from any site, but you can enter the site URL. And like I said, it can be any URL. It can also be the base URL, for example, here. And then it loads all the libraries from that base site. Here I have some other sites, but if we go into sites/core data demo and load it again, we would see these libraries, employees, and products. That's what I did here. And the rest is the same. You define the display column. If it's a multi-lookup, and down here, the normal lookup configuration, default, enhanced, drop-down values. That's actually also lookup filter you can add here. That's what I did on this employee field. So it's just the lookup to the employees. And down here, I selected all these values or these columns. And that's it. And it works like from a permission perspective, of course, the end user needs to have permissions on that list as well. So on that core data, at least 3 permissions on that list, the user needs to have to get these values. Of course, if you have item level permissions, you would just see the ones you have permissions to. And then what was special here was this manage field, where we can retrieve information from directly via the lookup. That's quite simple, because with our expression language, if we look into the expressions, it's just the calculated one. So each time you change the employee, we retrieve the manager. And if we look at the possibilities in here, we would see that each lookup, so normal lookups like this one here, if you expand them, we load all the fields from the target list, so you can easily access the columns from the target list. So like here, color tag, for example, it's always lookup dot and then the column from the target list. And with the employee list, so the cross-site lookup, it's exactly the same. So that's a cross-site lookup, as you can see from this little icon. If I expand, see all the columns from that list, so the email address, etc. And one field was this manager field, which is a user field. And because it's a user field, we can expand it again and we can see the email, the title, the login name. And to set a user or a people picker field, you need to use the login name. And that's the only thing I did here. So I simply took the login name, double click, and that's it. So we can retrieve values via the cross-site lookup like this, quite easy. And each time this one will change. So if you change the employee, then this field is recalculated again. So that's how I was retrieving this here. For sure, if you don't need to store that value in the list itself, you can also just add a rich text box. And since some months, we can also do the same, what we do here. So this one, we could also use in rich text. Manager double point, for example, like this. This would also work, and then the login name is just written as text into onto the form, but it will not be stored. It's just a visual thing here. So that's something you can do as well. But I need to use that information because I've added another list down here. Basically by pressing the plus, and at the very bottom we see all these lists and libraries. I took the expense list, and if we look at the settings of that expense list, I was not checking that user sub item. That would be the case if you do these dossiers, which is a master detail scenario, what we can build. So I was not doing this. I was using a query. And this query is a camel query, which is a standard SharePoint query language. We do have a builder for that. And the only thing that I configured in here was I was ordering the items by year and by month. That's what I did up here. So you can add order columns like this. And then I was adding 3 conditions or 3 filters, basically. So first of all, down here, we have the face, and the face should not be finished and it should not be preparation. So it's not equal. And then I was saying by value. And up here, the manager, I was using a form input. So form input is just the people picker field above. That's the manager field. And I was using that manager to filter out all the expense requests where the manager is the same as the one in here. So it's a dynamic filter. This here is static, and this part here is dynamic. And that's the only thing. I can even test it in here. So I guess here I don't have a manager, so it would return nothing. Yeah, right. So, but if I would have an item with a manager set, I can even test that here against an item, and I can see what would be returned. Right. So that's a sublist with a dynamic filter added to this form here. Then here on the right side, I've added a number field, and this shows the sum of all these sub items. So this one here, and it's just a calculated field, a calculated expression, and because we have sublists, as soon as you add a sublist, you have an additional node here for sublists in your expression builder, which shows you all the sublists that you have on your form. In my case, it's just one. If you expand it, you see you have the selected items and you have all the other values. So only the columns you have in the view, only those you can access. And I was taking the total, and then you have these aggregation functions. So you can sum, average, count, min, max. The only thing I did here is I took the sum. And again, you can just double click. It will add sublist, expenses, total amount, sum. And each time this will change. So if the total amount of the items in that sublist will change, the sum will be recalculated. So again, quite simple, no coding skills needed, just this one. And then last but not least, maybe the most complex thing here was this query function. It's just a text field that I've added. And again, if I don't want to store that, I could as well use just the rich text field and show it in there. I was using a text field because it was just easier for me. It was disabled, so you cannot change it. And here, again, in calculated, I was using our query functions. And the query functions are available in the context objects, on the web or site. Basically, if it's something in the same site, web is actually an old legacy word, because previously there was a web and site. Now you have sites and site collections. But I'm almost every time I'm taking the web because it's the local one. If you deploy it somewhere else in another web sub-site, whatever, it will always work. So if you expand web, you can see 3 functions: query list, get values for query, and get first value for query. The thing I did here, scroll at the very end, you see the parameters once you add it to the expression builder. So if you double click, you see the query list needs to have a list name, which is the display name. That's why it's probably better to use the relative URL. I'm always taking the relative URL because that cannot be changed. Then a camel query, max num rows, so how many items to return, view fields, which fields, and then some attributes. So that's probably the most complex one from these 3, which would be too long for today. But first for query is returning 1 item, and it's the same thing, just 3 parameters: the field you want to return, a camel query, and the list name. As you can see, that's how I do it. If I access a list, I'm even doing the base server relative URL, I'm doing dynamic. So if you deploy it somewhere else, it would always work. And then /list/activities. So from the activity list, I want to retrieve the title, and in the middle, I'm having my query. I know today you still have to know how to write that query. Probably in the future, we will add the query builder directly here somewhere, how to, I don't know, right click, however, to get that query in here. Now you have to write it somewhere else or get it from somewhere, but it's just a camel query. I'm comparing the ID, and the only important thing in here is the ID needs to be dynamic, and I'm using another placeholder in here where I'm accessing the sub list again, so sublist.expenses, and then I'm accessing the selected items node, the ID. And since you can select more than 1 item, I'm always getting the first one. So .0, or the 0 is the index 0 of that array. I'm always getting the first item ID, and this item I will return the title. So this is quite a powerful query. Also, all these 3 are quite powerful to retrieve 1 item, multiple items from other lists. But it's not as easy as the other things, for sure, to get that. I hope I was able to show you some nice ways to bring your data from other lists into your SharePoint Forms. Thanks for watching. See you soon.